Raute, I discovered my husband had a secret family. Part 1. Raute turns out I controlled his finances. The pulsing glow of my laptop was the only light in our home office at 2:17 Uhr nachts. Outside, the November rain lashed against the windows of our craftsman-style house in the suburbs of Portland, the house we purchased 10 years into our marriage, the one with the extra bedroom that remained persistently empty despite years of trying. I rubbed my eyes, squinting at the spreadsheet I'd been poring over for hours. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. That's why I'd built my career on them. Something's off, I murmured, scrolling back through 3 years of meticulous financial records. I took a sip of chamomile tea, now cold and bitter, hoping it might calm my racing thoughts. At 41, I prided myself on precision. As a senior financial advisor at Westlake Partners, I guided millionaires through their investment portfolios with unwavering confidence. My colleagues joked that Caroline Mitchell could smell a financial irregularity from a mile away. The bloodhound, they called me, always with respect, never to my face. I applied the same exactitude to our personal finances. Greg never complained, in fact, he seemed grateful. "You're saving us from my impulsive self," he'd said when we first married 15 years ago, handing over his financial reins with visible relief. My creative, spontaneous husband, the architectural photographer whose eye for beauty had captured my heart despite all my practical reservations. Our system was simple but effective. Joint accounts for household expenses, separate retirement funds, and personal discretionary accounts for each of us. Greg received $500 monthly for whatever he wanted: camera equipment, lunches with colleagues, gifts I wasn't supposed to know about. No questions asked. The arrangement had functioned flawlessly for our entire marriage. Until 3 days ago, when I discovered the discrepancies. It had started innocently enough. The bank had sent a misfiled statement for an account I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have dismissed it as a clerical error, but something caught my eye: a familiar transfer pattern. Greg's discretionary account showed regular withdrawals to this unknown account. They started small, $50 in February 3 years ago. $75 the month after. Gradually increasing. Last month, $350. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a migraine. What did one do with this kind of discovery at 2 Uhr nachts? Wake your husband and demand answers? Pretend you never saw it? I'd spent 3 days checking and rechecking, hoping to find an error in my analysis, some explanation that wouldn't shatter the foundation of trust our marriage was built upon. There was no error. I closed the laptop, plunging the room into darkness, and made my way upstairs. Greg's gentle snoring greeted me as I entered our bedroom. I stood in the doorway, watching him sleep, his face relaxed and boyish in repose. At 45, he still had the same unruly brown hair that flopped over his forehead, the same laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened over our years together. I loved those lines, each one earned from genuine joy, from seeing beauty where others missed it. Was this the face of a man living a double life? I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling. My mind conjured possibilities, each worse than the last. A gambling addiction? An investment scheme gone wrong? Another woman? Another family? The thought hit me with such force that I almost gasped aloud. Greg shifted beside me, his arm instinctively reaching for me in sleep. I remained rigid, unable to accept the comfort of his touch. "I'll find out tomorrow," I promised myself, finally closing my eyes as dawn began to break through the curtains. Morning arrived with domestic normalcy so jarring it felt almost theatrical. Greg whistled as he knotted his blue tie, the one I'd given him last Christmas, and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "Big day?" I asked, pouring coffee into his travel mug. My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. He nodded, taking a bite of the apple. "That development downtown, the one with the controversial facade? They finally want interior shots." Could be a cover for Architectural Digest if I nail it. That's wonderful, I said, watching him carefully. Did his eyes shift away too quickly? Was there tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday? I'm meeting with the Harrison account after work, he added, kissing my forehead. Don't wait up. The Harrison account. I'd heard about this client for months now. Always requiring evening meetings. Always running late. Suche, I smiled, the expression feeling plastic on my face. Have a good day. After the door closed behind him, I stood motionless in our kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of our life together, the copper pots hanging above the island, the framed black and white photographs. Greg had taken on our honeymoon in Greece, the ceramic bowl I'd painted at that ridiculous pottery class he'd insisted would be fun. It was. 15 years of shared history stared back at me from every corner. I made my decision. Returning to the home office, I opened my laptop and signed into our bank accounts. With a few keystrokes, I transferred the remaining balance from Greg's discretionary account, all $150 of it, back into our joint account. Then I froze his access to all but his personal credit card, which had a modest limit of $2,000. It was a calculated risk. If there was an innocent explanation, I'd appear controlling and paranoid. If not, well, I needed to know. With that done, I headed to the office, my game face firmly in place. No one at Westlake Partners would guess that Caroline Mitchell's perfect life might be unraveling. I spent the day guiding clients through retirement projections and tax-efficient withdrawal strategies, my professional mask never slipping. At 8:32 abends, my phone buzzed with a text from Greg. Stern, something's wrong with my cart. Can you check the account? I stared at the message for a long minute, then set the phone down without responding. I was in our home office again, the spreadsheet open before me. I added a new column, meticulously tracking every transfer to the unknown account. The total over 3 years, $9,875. Not enough to maintain another household, perhaps, but certainly enough to support someone. At 9:17 abends, another text arrived. Stern, babe? Everything okay? Stern, still. I didn't answer. At 10:05 abends, Stern, coming home now. Stern, I closed the spreadsheet and opened a document I'd prepared earlier that day, a detailed list of every transfer, every date, every amount. I printed it out and placed it on the desk between two chairs. When the front door opened at 10:43 abends, I was waiting, seated calmly with my hands folded in my lap. Greg's footsteps sounded in the hallway, hesitant and uneven. Caroline, he called out. In the office, I replied, my voice steady. He appeared in the doorway, his face unnaturally pale. His tie was askew, his normally neat hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. What's going on? My cart was declined at dinner with the Harrisons. I had to borrow cash from Jim to cover the check. It was mortifying. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, Greg. His eyes darted to the printed document on the desk, then back to my face. What is this about? There is no Harrison account, is there? The color drained further from his face. I don't understand what you mean. Please, I said, my control starting to fray. Don't insult my intelligence. I found the transfers. 3 years' worth. I pushed the paper toward him. I just want to know what was worth lying about for so long. Greg sank into the chair across from me, shoulders slumping in defeat. He picked up the paper, his hands visibly trembling as he scanned the list of dates and amounts. I can explain, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I certainly hope so. I fought to keep my tone neutral, professional, the same voice I used with clients making catastrophic financial decisions. Because right now, my imagination is running wild, and none of the scenarios are particularly flattering. Greg set the paper down and looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. His eyes, those warm hazel eyes that still made my heart skip, were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Ihr Name ist Elise, he said finally. And the boy's name is Sam. He's 7. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the arms of my chair, steadying myself. You have a child? The words came out choked, almost strangled. No. Greg's response was immediate, emphatic. Not biologically. But practically, yes. He ran a hand through his hair, confirming my earlier suspicion about its dishevelment. Elise was married to my cousin David. When he died overseas, I started helping them out. I searched my memory. Your cousin David died 10 years ago in Afghanistan. Before we met. Yes. And you've been supporting his wife and child in secret? For years? I tried to process this information, to fit it into the narrative of our life together. It didn't compute. Greg nodded, unable to meet my eyes. At first, it was just grocery money when she lost her job. Then Sam needed therapy after some kids bullied him at school. Then specialized classes for his learning disability. He rubbed his face with both hands, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. Elise was too proud to accept regular charity, so I told her it was from a veterans support fund. Why not tell me? I demanded, my voice rising slightly. Why the secrecy? Why the lies about client meetings? Because when we first started dating, you made it clear how you felt about financial entanglements with family. Remember your brother's business loan? You said mixing money and family always ends badly. I remembered. My brother's failed restaurant had nearly bankrupted our parents, creating a rift in the family that had never fully healed. I vowed never to make the same mistake. So you've been hiding this for our entire marriage? Making up client meetings to visit them? Not often, he said defensively. Mostly I just transfer the money. But Sam had a school performance tonight. He was playing the lead in the class play. I tried to reconcile the man I knew, honest, forthright Greg, who couldn't keep a surprise birthday party secret for more than a day, with someone capable of sustaining a deception for years. Show me a picture, I said suddenly. Greg hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled briefly before turning the screen toward me. On it was a skinny boy with sandy-colored hair and a gap-toothed smile, holding a paper award certificate. This is from last year, Greg said softly. He won the mathematics competition. First in his grade. I stared at the boy's face, searching for any resemblance to my husband, any sign that Greg's explanation was another lie. But all I saw was a happy child, probably around 6 in the photo, with eyes crinkled in delight at his achievement. You should have told me, I said, surprised to find my anger beginning to ebb, replaced by a complicated mixture of hurt and confusion. I know. Greg's voice cracked. It started so small, and then it became this secret I didn't know how to share. The longer it went on, the harder it seemed to come clean. We could have helped them properly, set up a college fund, made it official. Greg looked up, surprise crossing his features. You're not mad about the money? I'm furious that you lied, I said, my voice finally betraying my emotion. But not about why. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through my tangled feelings. Family is family, Greg. If they're important to you, they should have been important to us. Relief flooded his face, followed immediately by shame. I'm so sorry, Caroline. I never meant for it to go on this long. It happened so gradually. I nodded, understanding despite myself. How many times had I seen clients make the same mistake, small financial decisions compounding over time until they found themselves in untenable situations? I want to meet them, I said decisively. Greg blinked, clearly caught off guard. You do? Yes. If they're part of your life, they should be part of our life. No more secrets. Of course, he agreed quickly. I'll arrange it. And I want to see their financial situation all of it. If we're going to help, we'll do it properly. Greg nodded, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. Thank you for understanding. I know I don't deserve it. I wasn't sure if I understood, not fully. But I knew that in the spectrum of possible revelations, this one was far from the worst. My husband hadn't betrayed our marriage vows or gambled away our savings. He'd been secretly helping family members in need, albeit in a way that violated our trust. We have a lot to talk about, I said, suddenly exhausted. But it's late, and I haven't slept properly in days. Let's continue this tomorrow. As we prepared for bed in silence, I felt the weight of unasked questions between us. Who was Elise beyond being David's widow? What was her relationship with Greg really like? Why had he felt the need to see Sam's school performance in person? That night, lying beside my husband with inches of cold space between us, I realized that discovering financial infidelity was only the beginning. The real question was whether our marriage could survive the breach of trust and whether I was ready to expand our carefully constructed life to include people I'd never known existed. The following Saturday, I found myself sitting in an unfamiliar cafe in a part of Portland I rarely visited, watching the door with nervous anticipation. Greg sat beside me, fidgeting with his napkin, his anxiety palpable. They're usually very punctual, he said for the third time, checking his watch. Elise works as a nurse now. Weekend shifts are complicated with childcare. I nodded, trying to appear calmer than I felt. The past 5 days had been a crash course in a shadow life I hadn't known my husband maintained. Each revelation had brought fresh questions, fresh uncertainties. Greg had shown me photos of Elise and Sam years worth, stored in a hidden folder on his phone. I'd learned that David, Greg's cousin, had been more like a brother to him growing up. They'd been inseparable until David joined the army, seeking structure and purpose after a troubled adolescence. His death in Afghanistan had devastated Greg, who'd promised to look after Elise and her then unborn child. You never mentioned any of this when we met, I'd said, puzzled by the omission of such a significant relationship. It was still raw, Greg had explained. And Elise had moved to Seattle with her parents after David died. We lost touch until she moved back to Portland about 3 years ago. The timing aligned with the first transfer I'd discovered. The story made sense. Yet something still felt off, not necessarily wrong, but incomplete. The cafe door opened, and Greg straightened beside me. That's them, he said softly. I turned to see a slender woman with auburn hair pulled into a practical bun, holding the hand of a lanky boy in a Portland Trail Blazers sweatshirt. They scanned the cafe until Greg raised his hand in a small wave. The boy's face lit up with recognition, and he tugged his mother toward our table. "Uncle Greg!" he exclaimed, and I noted with surprise that he spoke with a slight stutter. "Why you came?" Greg stood, his smile genuine and warm in a way that made my chest tighten. "Hey, Temp! Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" The boy nodded solemnly before turning curious eyes to me. "Is this A und Caroline?" Stern A und Caroline Stern. The title hit me with unexpected force. Greg had told them about me. "Yes," Greg said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Sam, Elise, this is my wife, Caroline." I stood, extending my hand professionally before realizing how formal the Gesture appeared. Elise seemed equally uncertain, her smile tentative as she shook my hand. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected, with a slight huskiness that suggested either a recent cold or a smoking habit. "Greg talks about you all the time." "Does he?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Of course. The financial whiz who keeps him organized." Her laugh was slightly nervous. "I've told him 100 times how lucky he is." I felt off balance, unsure how to respond to this woman who seemingly knew details about my life while remaining completely unknown to me. Before I could formulate a reply, Sam interjected. Uncle Greg said you're smart with money, he said, studying me with frank curiosity. Can you teach me about stocks? I want to invest my allowance. Despite everything, I found myself smiling at the boy's earnestness. That's very forward-thinking of you, Sam. How old are you now? 7¾ he answered promptly. Nearly 8. That's the perfect age to start learning about compound interest, I said, slipping into the comfortable role of financial educator. Why don't we sit down, and I can explain the basics? As we settled at the table, I watched Greg with Sam and Elise, noting the easy familiarity between them. Greg knew that Sam preferred his hot chocolate with extra whipped cream but no marshmallows. He asked about a science project Elise had mentioned last time, and listened intently as Sam described his teacher's reaction to his presentation on renewable energy. They were comfortable together. Familia. A unit. Something cold and unsettling formed in the pit of my stomach. How often do you all get together? I asked, keeping my tone light. Elise and Greg exchanged a quick glance before she answered. Usually once a month or so. More often if Sam has a special event at school. I see. I took a sip of my latte, using the moment to compose myself. And these meetings have been going on for about 3 years, Elise confirmed, matching my casual tone but watching me carefully. Since we moved back to Portland. The V Veterans Fund has been helping us too, Sam added proudly. And Mom says we're very lucky. I saw Elise tense slightly, her eyes darting to Greg. My husband suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup. The Veterans Fund, I repeated. Yes, Greg mentioned that. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sam, oblivious to the adult tension, continued chattering about his science project and his upcoming soccer tournament. I nodded and responded appropriately, but my attention was split, watching the silent communication happening between my husband and this woman who had been in his life for years without my knowledge. As the meeting progressed, I found myself studying Elise more closely. She was attractive in an understated way, with intelligent green eyes and a quiet dignity in her bearing. She spoke about her nursing career with passion, describing the challenges and rewards of working in pediatric care. When she mentioned David, her voice softened with old grief, but there was no bitterness there, just a wistful acknowledgement of a life cut short. I wanted to dislike her. It would have been easier if she'd been unlikable. After an hour that felt simultaneously too short and endless, Elise checked her watch and announced that they needed to leave for Sam's soccer practice. The boy looked disappointed but didn't argue. It was really nice meeting you, Caroline, Elise said as we all stood. I hope we can do this again. Actually, I heard myself say, why don't you both come to dinner at our house next Friday? Sam can see Greg's darkroom, and we can talk more comfortably. Greg's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he quickly schooled his expression. That's a great idea. Are you sure? Elise asked, her gaze searching my face. We don't want to impose. I'm sure, I said, making the decision in that moment. Family is important. Sam's face brightened. See, can we really see the darkroom? Mom says I can't have one until I'm older. Absolutely, Greg grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. I'll show you how to develop your own film. As we said our goodbyes, I noticed Sam throw his arms around Greg in a tight hug, and my husband's expression as he returned the embrace a mixture of tenderness and something that looked remarkably like longing. We walked to our car in silence. Once in sight, I turned to Greg. The Veterans Fund? He had the grace to look ashamed. I told you about that part. Yes, but seeing Sam talk about it so innocently. I shook my head. He believes people are helping his family out of respect for his father's service. They are, Greg said quietly. Just only one person. I digested this, trying to sort through my complicated reactions. You clearly care about them a great deal. I do, he admitted. David asked me to look out for them if anything happened to him. I promised I would. A promise you kept secret from your wife for 15 years. Greg winced. That's not fair. They were out of my life for a decade. It's only been 3 years since they came back to Portland. 3 years you've been lying to me, I countered. Not lying, exactly, omission is still deception, Greg. You know that. He sighed heavily. You're right. I'm sorry. We drove home in strained silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into our driveway, I finally voiced the question that had been nagging at me since the cafe. Is there something between you and Elise? Something more than family obligation? Greg's head snapped toward me, his expression genuinely shocked. What? No. Absolutely not. You seem very comfortable together, I persisted. And the way you look at Sam. Because I care about them, Greg said, a note of frustration entering his voice. David was like my brother, Caroline. And yes, I care about Sam, he's a great kid. But there's nothing romantic between Elise and me. Never has been, never will be. I studied his face, searching for any signs of deception. Then why the secrecy? Why not just tell me from the beginning? Greg turned off the car and leaned back in his seat, staring out the windshield. Honestly? At first, I was just sending a little money. It didn't seem worth mentioning. Then it became this regular thing, and I was embarrassed. Embarrassed? About helping family? Embarrassed that I was going behind your back, he clarified. That I hadn't discussed it with you first. And teen? He trailed off, his expression troubled. And teen? Greg hesitated before continuing. And then, as I got to know Sam better, I realized how much I enjoyed spending time with him. How much I looked forward to our visits. And that felt complicated. Complicated how? He turned to face me, his eyes revealing a vulnerability I rarely saw. We tried for years to have children, Caroline. Years of disappointment. And then we just stopped trying. Stopped talking about it altogether. The unspoken truth hung between us. After 3 years of negative pregnancy tests and 1 early miscarriage, I had been the one to call a halt to our efforts. The monthly cycle of hope and devastation had become too much to bear. Greg had accepted my decision without argument, though I'd occasionally caught him watching children in parks with an expression that made my heart ache. So Sam became a substitute, I said softly, understanding dawning. The child we couldn't have. Greg shook his head. Not a substitute. That's not fair to him or to us. But being around him. It filled something in me I didn't realize was still empty. He reached for my hand across the console. I should have told you. I see that now. I was afraid you'd see it as a betrayal somehow. That I was still holding on to something you'd made peace with. Had I made peace with it? I wasn't sure. We'd channeled our energies into our careers, into travel, into making our house a home. We'd created a good life together, a different life than we'd initially imagined, but a fulfilling one nonetheless. At least, that's what I'd told myself. I need time to process all this, I said finally, gently withdrawing my hand from his. It's a lot to take in. Greg nodded, his expression somber. I understand. And I really am sorry, Caroline. Not for helping them, but for keeping it from you. For breaking your trust. As we entered our house, our perfect, childless house with its pristine surfaces and carefully curated artwork, I wondered if it was possible to rebuild trust once it had been shattered. And more troublingly, I wondered what other emotional needs my husband might have been silently nursing all these years. The week that followed was a delicate dance of normalcy and negotiation. On the surface, Greg and I maintained our routines: morning coffee, work discussions over dinner, occasional updates about friends or colleagues. Beneath that veneer, however, we were engaged in a careful reassessment of our relationship. I unfroze Greg's accounts the morning after meeting Elise and Sam, acknowledging that financial punishment was both petty and counterproductive. Instead, we sat down together and created a new budget line: family support. I insisted on formalizing what had been covert charity, setting up a proper monthly transfer that wouldn't strain our finances but would provide meaningful assistance. $300 monthly, I said, making the adjustment in our spreadsheet. Plus an additional fund for educational expenses. I'm thinking we should start a $529 college savings plan for Sam. Greg stared at me, clearly surprised by my practical approach to the situation. You're serious about this? Of course I am, I replied, not looking up from the laptop. If we're going to help, we'll do it properly. No more furtive transfers that look suspicious on bank statements. Thank you, he said quietly. This means a lot to me. I finally met his gaze. I'm still hurt, Greg. And I'm still trying to understand why you felt you couldn't share this with me. But I'm not a monster. That boy deserves support. What I didn't say was how much Sam's stuttering reminded me of my younger brother before years of speech therapy. How his earnest questions about investing had sparked something protective in me. How his gap-toothed smile in those photos had made me wonder, just for a moment, what our child might have looked like. Those thoughts felt too raw, too personal to share just yet. As Friday approached, I threw myself into preparations for dinner with an intensity that surprised even me. I researched child-friendly recipes, eventually settling on homemade pizza that Sam could help assemble. I cleaned the guest bedroom that had once been designated as a nursery, removing the financial journals and exercise equipment that had gradually filled the space, making it presentable for a curious 7-year-old. Greg watched these efforts with a mixture of gratitude and wariness, as if afraid to trust my apparent acceptance of the situation. You don't have to go to all this trouble, he said on Thursday evening as I was writing out a shopping list. It's just a casual dinner. I want them to feel welcome, I replied, not looking up from my list. Is there anything special Sam likes for dessert? Greg hesitated before answering. He loves anything with chocolate. But he has a slight peanut allergy, nothing serious, but Elise is careful about it. I added chocolate ice cream, no peanuts, to the list, struck by how much Greg knew about this child who had been invisible to me until a week ago. How many other details about Sam and Elise resided in my husband's memory, forming a parallel life I hadn't been invited to share. Friday evening arrived with a nervous energy pervading our house. I'd left work early to prepare, making pizza dough from scratch and setting out toppings in colorful bowls. Greg helped silently, arranging his photographs in the dark room for Sam's viewing, occasionally casting uncertain glances my way. When the doorbell rang at precisely 6 Uhr abends, we both startled despite expecting it. Ready? Greg asked, his hand on the small of my back. As I'll ever be, I replied, straightening my shoulders and fixing a welcoming smile on my face. Sam burst through the door the moment Greg opened it, his excitement palpable. Is it true you have a real darkroom? See, can we develop pictures tonight? I brought my disposable camera. Elise followed more sedately, carrying a bouquet of mixed flowers and a bottle of wine. I told him he needs to say hello properly before bombarding you with questions, she said, her expression apologetic. But he's been talking about nothing else all week. It's fine, I assured her, accepting the flowers with genuine appreciation. We're glad you could come. As we moved into the kitchen, I observed the easy way Elise navigated our home, not with the tentativeness of a first-time visitor, but with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had been there before. She knew where the glasses were kept, which drawer held the silverware. You've been here, I said, the realization stopping me mid-step. Elise froze, wine glass halfway to her lips. Her eyes darted to Greg, who had been showing Sam how to stretch pizza dough. When? I asked, keeping my voice controlled despite the renewed sense of betrayal washing over me. Just once, Greg interjected quickly. Last year, when you were at that conference in Chicago. Sam had that science project, remember? The one with the solar panels? We needed some specialized equipment from my workshop. The weekend conference in Chicago. For days I'd spent presenting on retirement strategies for medical professionals while my husband apparently hosted his secret family in our home. I see, I said, setting down the flowers I'd been about to arrange. How convenient. Caroline, Greg began, but I cut him off with a sharp look. Later, I said firmly, conscious of Sam watching our exchange with growing concern. Let's focus on dinner. To my surprise, it was Elise who diffused the tension, smoothly changing the subject to Sam's upcoming science fair and engaging me in a discussion about educational approaches for children with learning differences. By the time we were assembling our pizzas, the awkwardness had slightly diminished, though I noted that Greg remained unusually quiet. Sam proved to be both sensitive and perceptive, qualities I hadn't fully registered during our brief cafe meeting. He noticed when conversations became strained and instinctively redirected with an observation or question. He helped clear plates without being asked, complimented the food with genuine enthusiasm, and showed remarkable patience when Greg explained the complexities of film development. Photography is about seeing what others miss, Sam told me seriously as Greg showed him how to load film into the developing canister. Uncle Greg says you have to look for the light in unexpected places. That sounds like him, I agreed, watching my husband's gentle guidance with a fresh perspective. Greg had always had a talent for finding beauty in overlooked corners. It was what made him exceptional at his work. That same quality had apparently extended to this fatherless boy who stuttered when excited and possessed an old soul's wisdom. Later, as we shared the promised chocolate ice cream, carefully verified to be peanut-free, I found myself seated beside Elise at the kitchen island while Greg and Sam examined their freshly developed negatives in the darkroom. I want you to know, Elise said quietly, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between us, that Greg never betrayed you. Not in the way you might be fearing. I stiffened slightly. I didn't say you didn't have to. Hiagaze was direct, unflinching. I know what this looks like. A secret relationship spanning years, hidden meetings, financial transfers. If our positions were reversed, I'd have the same concerns. I studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation but finding only straightforward honesty. Greg and I are connected through David, she continued. Nothing more, nothing less. He's been a godsend for Sam, a male figure who cares and shows up consistently. But there has never been anything romantic between us. Then why all the secrecy? I asked, voicing the question that had plagued me for days. Why not just tell me from the beginning? Elise considered this, absently tracing the rim of her wine glass. I can't speak for Greg's reasons. But I wondered sometimes if he kept us separate because he was protecting something. Raute, I discovered my husband had a secret family. Part 2. Raute, the path to reconciliation and redefinition, sometimes a complicated one, Elise finished. He feels responsible for people in a way that can be both beautiful and burdensome. I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Greg's deep sense of responsibility had drawn me to him initially, his unwavering commitment to those he cared about. It was what made him a reliable husband, a trusted friend. Yet that same quality had now created this fracture between us. Our conversation was interrupted by Sam bursting into the kitchen, clutching a strip of negatives with the reverence of someone holding ancient treasure. Mom! Look what we did! Uncle Greg says we can make prints tomorrow if you can come back. His eyes, bright with excitement, turned to me. Is that okay, Aunt Caroline? Stern, Aunt Caroline Stern. The second time he used the title, and it still felt foreign to my ears, a role I hadn't auditioned for suddenly thrust upon me. Of course, I hurt myself say, noting Greg's surprised expression as he followed Sam into the kitchen. "You're welcome anytime." Greg's eyes met mine across the room, searching for the truth behind my words. I gave him a small nod, confirming my sincerity. Whatever complications existed between the adults, Sam deserved better than to be caught in the crossfire. After they left Sam clutching his strip of negatives, Elise promising they'd return the next day, Greg and I faced each other in the sudden quiet of our home. "You meant it?" he asked cautiously. "About them coming back tomorrow?" "Yes," I said, gathering empty ice cream bowls. "Sam should finish what he started. Ain't we?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "We need to figure out what this means for us going forward." Greg stepped closer, taking the bowls from my hands and setting them aside. "What do you want it to mean?" It was a fair question, one I'd been pondering all week without reaching a clear conclusion. The initial shock and betrayal had gradually given way to something more nuanced, a mixture of hurt over the deception and reluctant understanding of the complex emotions behind it. "I want honesty," I said finally. "Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when you think I might disapprove or judge." "I can do that," he promised, reaching tentatively for my hand. "No more secrets." I allowed him to take my hand, though I maintained a small distance between us. "And I want us to talk about the things we've been avoiding. About family and children and what we really want for our future." A shadow crossed Greg's face. "Caroline, I don't expect you to." "This isn't about expectations," I interrupted. "It's about acknowledging reality. You've created a relationship with Sam that fulfills something important for you. Something I thought you'd come to terms with not having." "I had," he insisted. "We built a good life together. But it wasn't enough." The words hung between us, stark in their honesty. "Not completely." Greg didn't deny it, which was its own kind of answer. "I need time," I said, gently withdrawing my hand from his. "Tonight was illuminating. But I'm still processing everything." "I understand." He stepped back, giving me the space I'd silently requested. "For what it's worth, seeing you with Sam tonight, the way you made him feel welcome despite everything. It reminded me of all the reasons I fell in love with you." I offered a tired smile. "Get some rest, Greg. We have guests coming tomorrow." As I prepared for bed alone, I found myself thinking about family, not the one we're born into, but the one we choose to create. Greg had chosen to be part of Sam's life, to fulfill a promise to his cousin that extended beyond financial support into genuine love and mentorship. I had to decide whether I could choose to embrace this unexpected extension of our family, with all its complications and unspoken histories. The answer, I realized as sleep finally claimed me, wasn't as simple as yes or no. It would be a daily choice, a continual recalibration of boundaries and expectations. A new definition of family that neither of us had anticipated 15 years ago. The next morning, I woke early and slipped out to the bakery for fresh pastries, chocolate croissants for Sam, almond for Elise, and Greg's favorite cinnamon rolls. It was a peace offering of sorts, though I wasn't entirely sure to whom. When I returned, I found Greg in the kitchen preparing coffee, his expression brightening when he saw the bakery box. "You remembered," he said softly. 15 years of marriage," I replied with a small shrug. "Some things stick." We moved around each other cautiously, setting out plates and mugs, maintaining a careful politeness that was both familiar and strange. Like the early days of our relationship, when every gesture carried weight and possibility. "I was thinking," Greg said as he measured coffee grounds, "about what you said last night. About honesty." He paused, focusing intently on the task at hand. "There's something else you should know." My hand still on the silverware I'd been arranging. "What is it?" Greg turned to face me, his expression serious. David's parents left some money for Sam when they passed away a few years ago. It's in a trust that he can't access until he's 25. Okay, I said slowly, not understanding the significance. I'm the trustee, Greg continued. Elise wanted someone financially savvy, and at the time, her relationship with her own parents was strained. I processed this new information, adding it to the growing mosaic of Greg's connection to Elise and Sam. How much are we talking about? A little over $200,000. It's conservatively invested, mostly in index funds. Not an insignificant sum, especially for a child Sam's age. And when were you planning to tell me about this responsibility? Greg looked genuinely contrite. I should have told you from the beginning. But it seemed separate from our finances. I'm not contributing to it, just overseeing it. But you're legally responsible for it, I pointed out. That's a significant obligation. Yes, he acknowledged. I wanted to do right by David. And by Sam. I considered this, my financial advisor instincts automatically assessing the implications. I'd like to review the portfolio. Make sure it's optimally allocated for long-term growth. Greg's eyebrows rose in surprise. You want to help manage it? If it's important to you, it should be important to us, I said, echoing my earlier sentiment. Besides, educational costs will only increase in the next decade. 200,000 might not stretch as far as you think. A cautious smile spread across Greg's face. You're incredible, you know that? Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing Sam and Elise's arrival. The boy practically bounced into the kitchen, his energy seemingly undiminished from the previous evening. We brought RC camera with new film, he announced, holding up a disposable camera. Uncle Greg said we could take pictures in the park and develop them. That sounds like a wonderful idea, I said, offering him a chocolate croissant. After breakfast, of course. The day unfolded with surprising ease. We walked to the nearby park, where Sam took carefully composed photographs under Greg's guidance. I found myself genuinely enjoying the boy's company, his thoughtful questions, his determination to overcome his stutter when explaining his artistic choices, his unbridled delight when a squirrel posed perfectly for his camera. Elise walked beside me, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly open to conversation. He hasn't stopped talking about yesterday since we left, she confided. Especially the darkroom. He thinks your husband is basically a wizard. I smiled, watching Greg crouched beside Sam, showing him how to frame a shot of the downtown skyline visible from the park's highest point. Greg has that effect on people. He sees the world differently, makes you want to see it that way too. That's what drew David to him, Elise said quietly. My husband was always so practical, so focused on structure and rules. Greg showed him there was beauty in unexpected places. I turned to study her profile, struck by the absence of artifice in her manner. Were you surprised when Greg reached out after you moved back to Portland? She considered the question. Yes and no. Surprised by the timing, perhaps, but not by the gesture itself. That's who Greg is. He remembers people, keeps them in his heart. Even when he doesn't mention them to his wife, I couldn't help adding, though I kept my tone light. Elise winced slightly. For what it's worth, assumed you knew. At least at first. It wasn't until Sam's school play last year that I realized something was off. Greg mentioned you were working late, but he seemed tense about it. That's when I suspected you might not be aware of our arrangement. Why didn't you say anything? She sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. It wasn't my place to interfere in your marriage. And selfishly, I was afraid of losing Greg's support, not just financially, but his presence in Sam's life. She glanced at me apologetically. My son doesn't have many constants. His father died Before he was born, my parents are gone, we've moved 3 times in 7 years. Greg has been one of the few steady influences in his life. I nodded, understanding her perspective even as I still grappled with my husband's deception. And the veteran's fund story? That was Greg's idea, she admitted. I was reluctant to accept help at first. Pride, I suppose. The fiction made it easier. And you've never? I hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the delicate question. Been romantically involved with your husband? Elise finished frankly. Never. Not even a hint of E.T. David was the love of my life, and Greg was his brother in all but blood. There are boundaries neither of us would cross. I believed her, I realized. There was a straightforwardness to Elise that resonated with my own nature, practical, direct, unembellished. If circumstances had been different, we might even have been friends. Caroline. Greg called from across the park. Sam wants to take a family portrait. Can you join us? Stern family portrait Stern. The phrase hung in the air, laden with implication. Elise touched my arm lightly. We don't have to if it's uncomfortable. No, I decided, squeering my shoulders. Let's do E.T. We arranged ourselves awkwardly on a park bench, Greg and I in the middle, Sam and Elise on either side, while a kind stranger took several photos with Sam's camera. As we resumed our walk afterward, Sam fell into step beside me, his expression suddenly serious. Aunt Caroline, he began, his stutter more pronounced. Do you think it's okay if I call you that? Mom said I should ask first. Something in my chest tightened at his earnestness. Of course you can, Sam. I'd be honored. Good, he said, relief evident in his voice. Because I already told my friends at school about my Aunt Caroline, who knows all about money and investing. Did you now? I glanced at Greg, who looked as surprised as I felt. Oh, Jimmy's aunt gives him video games. But my aunt is going to teach me how to be rich. He grinned up at me, gap-toothed and utterly sincere. That's way better. I laughed, genuinely amused by his assessment. Well, I don't know about rich, but I can certainly teach you how to be financially responsible. Same thing, he declared with the confidence of youth. By the time we returned to the house to develop Sam's new photographs, something subtle had shifted in the atmosphere between all of us. The rigid lines of differentiation Greg and I as one unit, Elise and Sam as another had begun to blur, creating space for a new configuration none of us had anticipated. That evening, after our guests had departed with promises of a return visit the following weekend, Greg and I sat in our living room, windows open to the cool spring breeze. Thank you, he said simply. For today. For everything. I considered his gratitude, measuring it against the complicated emotions of the past week. I'm still angry, told him honestly. The trust we built over 15 years, it matters, Greg. You damaged that. I know, he acknowledged, his expression somber. But I'm beginning to understand why. I took a deep breath, facing a truth I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. We stopped talking about what we really wanted. About family and children and the future. We created this perfect, controlled life that didn't have room for messiness or complications. Greg looked surprised by my assessment. You seemed content with our life. Parts of it, yes, I agreed. The career, the travel, the freedom. But I think we both accepted a compromise without ever really discussing ET, and nature abhors a vacuum. The things we didn't address found their way into our lives anyway. Through Sam and Elise, Greg said softly. Yes. I met his gaze directly. The question is, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? Greg leaned forward, his expression earnest. What do you want, Caroline? Truly? It was a deceptively simple question with a complex answer, one I'd been formulating all week without fully articulating, even to myself. I want honesty between us, I began, carefully choosing my words. Complete transparency about feelings and needs and expectations. I want to rebuild the trust that's been damaged. Greg nodded, encouraging me to continue. I want us to re-examine our definition of family, I continued, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. To consider possibilities we've closed ourselves off to. Such as? Greg asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. Such as a more formal role in Sam's life. Not just occasional visits or financial support, but a consistent presence. Maybe even. I hesitated, testing the weight of the words before speaking them. Maybe. Even exploring adoption or fostering down the road. Not as a replacement for what we couldn't have biologically, but as a valid choice in its own right. Greg's expression registered shock, followed quickly by a cautious hope. You're serious? I'm open to the conversation, I clarified. I spent years shutting down any mention of children because it hurt too much. Because each failure felt like a personal shortcoming. But seeing you with Sam today, the natural way you guide and support him, it reminded me that family can take many forms. Greg moved to sit beside me on the couch, taking my hands in his. Caroline, I don't want you to feel pressured into this because of my mistake. If you're suggesting this out of fear, or I'm not, I interrupted firmly. This isn't about fear. It's about possibility. About acknowledging that maybe we've been too rigid in our definition of what our life together should look like. And Elisa and Sam? They're already part of your life, Acknowledged. Which means they're part of our life. I'm not suggesting we become instant co-parents or anything dramatic. Just that we open ourselves to a deeper connection than we've allowed before. Greg squeezed my hands gently. You continue to amaze me, you know that? Most people would still be throwing plates after discovering what you did. Oh, I considered it, I assured him. With a wry smile. But what would that accomplish? Besides, we have the good china. He laughed, the tension between us easing incrementally. So where do we start? With a conversation, I said. Ditsis afli. With Elise, about boundaries and expectations. About what role we each want to play in Sam's life. And then one with Sam, at his level, to ensure he feels secure in all of this. Greg nodded, looking relieved that I had a practical plan, always my strength, navigating complex emotional terrain with structured approaches. And between us, he asked softly. I met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that something fundamental had been irreparably broken between us. We start with forgiveness, I said finally. Not forgetting, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing to move forward together. And with a promise to each other that we won't let unspoken needs create distance between us again. Greg's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I don't deserve you. Probably not, I agreed lightly. But you're stuck with me anyway. He pulled me into an embrace that felt both familiar and somehow new, charged with a renewed appreciation for what we'd built together and what we might yet create. Later that night, lying beside my husband with our fingers intertwined, I reflected on the strange journey of the past week. How a financial discrepancy had led to the unraveling of secrets, but also to the possibility of a richer, more authentic connection. How the family I thought we'd never have had somehow found its way to us through unexpected channels. There was still much to navigate, trust to rebuild, boundaries to establish, legal and practical considerations to address. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of expansion. Rather than contraction, of possibilities opening rather than closing. Sometimes, it seemed, the deepest betrayals could lead to the most profound growth if you were brave enough to face them. Honestly and generous enough to envision a new way forward. The following months unfolded with careful negotiations and gradual integrations. Elise, Sam, Greg, and I sat down for a frank discussion about expectations and boundaries, establishing parameters that respected all our needs while creating space for deeper connections. We started with simple traditions: Sunday dinners at our house every other week, monthly outings to museums or parks, a shared calendar that tracked Sam's school events and performances. Greg continued his darkroom sessions with Sam, their bond deepening through this shared passion. To my surprise, I found myself establishing my own connection with the boy, our mutual love of numbers and planning creating a natural affinity. Elise and I developed an unexpected friendship, our similar practical natures and commitment to Sam's well-being overriding the awkwardness of our unusual situation. I helped her navigate a career advancement opportunity at the hospital, utilizing my network of healthcare clients to make introductions. She, in turn, offered insights about childhood development that helped me better understand Sam's needs and strengths. 3 months after our initial discovery, we formalized our financial support, setting up a proper college fund and creating a transparent system that preserved Elise's dignity while ensuring Sam's future security. I took over management of David's parents' trust, optimizing the investments to maximize growth over the coming decades. You've thought of everything, Elise remarked as I walked her through the detailed financial plan I created. Sam is incredibly lucky to have you in his corner. We're all figuring this out together, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. The most significant milestone came 6 months into our new arrangement, when Elise approached us with an unexpected proposal. I've been offered a specialized training opportunity, she explained over dinner at our house one Sunday. A 6-week intensive course in pediatric trauma care in Boston. It would be a huge career advancement, but she glanced at Sam, who was absorbed in a game on Greg's phone, oblivious to the adult conversation. But it would mean leaving Sam, Greg completed her thought. Elise nodded, looking troubled. My parents are gone, my sister lives in Australia. There's no one I trust to take him for that long. We could, I heard myself say before fully processing the implications. He could stay with us. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me in surprise: Elise's, Greg's, and Sam's, who had apparently been listening after all. Really? Sam asked, his stutter nearly absent in his excitement. I could stay with Uncle Greg and Aunt Caroline? I met Greg's gaze across the table, seeking confirmation that we were on the same page. The gratitude and love in his expression told me everything I needed to know. Really, E. confirmed. If your mom agrees, of course. Are you sure? Elise asked quietly. 6 weeks is a significant commitment. We have the space, I said practically. Greg works from home 3 days a week, and I can adjust my schedule for the other days. Sam's school is actually closer to our house than yours. I calculated all this in the moment, my mind automatically mapping out the logistics. It would give you peace of mind to focus on your training, Greg added. And we'd love having him. Elise studied us both, seeming to measure our sincerity. Let me think about it, she said finally. It's a big step. But I could see in her eyes that she'd already made her decision, that she trusted us with her most precious responsibility. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. 2 weeks later, Sam moved temporarily into our guest room, which we'd redecorated with space-themed bedding and a proper desk for homework. The transition was smoother than any of us had anticipated, a testament to the groundwork we'd laid in the preceding months. I've never seen him so excited about math homework, Elise laughed during one of our nightly video calls. he says. Aunt Caroline makes fractions fun, which is nothing short of miraculous. I smiled, unexpectedly pleased by the compliment. He's a quick study. And surprisingly disciplined for his age. Tunk. You, Elise said, her expression growing serious. Not just for taking care of him, but for everything. For finding a way to turn what could have been a disaster into something beautiful. After we ended the call, I found Greg in his darkroom, carefully hanging prints from Sam's latest photography session to dry. These are actually good, I remarked, examining a black and white composition of tree branches against the sky. He has your eye. He does, doesn't he? Greg's pride was evident. Though I think he gets his perfectionism from you. He made me reprint this 3 times because the contrast wasn't exactly right. I laughed, leaning against the doorframe. He's asleep, finally. Insisted on finishing his book first. Classic Sam, Greg smiled. Always negotiating for just one more chapter. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, the gentle hum of the ventilation fan the only sound in the small, red-lit room. Are you happy? Greg asked suddenly, looking up. From the prince. With how things have turned out. From the prince. With how things have turned out. From the prince. With how things have turned out. I considered the question seriously, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The initial shock and betrayal had gradually given way to a new understanding of my husband, of myself, of what family could mean beyond conventional definitions. I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. Not because of how it started, but because of where we've ended up. We're more honest with each other now than we've been in years. Greg nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. It's as if we removed a wall we didn't even know was there. Exactly. I moved closer, examining another of Sam's photographs, this one a portrait of Greg and me laughing together, caught in an unguarded moment. He captured us perfectly here. He sees us, Greg said softly. The real us. As we prepared for bed that night, I paused at the guest room door, checking on Sam one last time. He was sprawled across the bed, one arm flung wide. His face peaceful in sleep. The book he'd been so determined to finish lay open on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. I gently removed the book, marking his place with a proper bookmark, one of many small lessons in care and order I'd been teaching him. As I pulled the covers over his shoulders, he stirred slightly. Night, Aunt Caroline, he murmured, half asleep. Love. You. Something within me shifted, a final piece settling into place. Love you too, Sam, I whispered back, surprised by how naturally the words came. Later, lying beside Greg in the darkness of our bedroom, I found myself contemplating the strange, unpredictable nature of families, how they could form and reform in patterns you never anticipated, filling spaces you didn't know were empty. I've been thinking, I said into the quiet between us, about making this arrangement more permanent. Greg turned toward me, his expression cautious in the dim light filtering through the curtains. What do you mean? Not taking Sam from Elise, I clarified quickly. But formalizing our role in his life. Legal guardianship, perhaps, in case of emergency. Or even. I hesitated. Testing the weight of the word. Co-parenting, of a sort. A more defined role as his family. I felt rather than saw Greg smile in the darkness. You've been researching, haven't you? Maybe, admit it. There are precedents for this kind of arrangement. Blended families of choice rather than Circumstanz. Greg reached for my hand across the bed. Caroline Mitchell, always finding the practical structure for emotional situations. Is that a bad thing? It's who you are, he said simply. The perfect complement to my impulsive nature. Together, we make a pretty good team. He squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of this truth. We should talk to Elise about it when she returns. See how she feels about formalizing our role in Sam's life. And how would you feel? Greg asked carefully. About officially becoming a parent figure at this stage of our lives? I considered the question, examining my feelings with the same thoroughness I applied to financial analysis. Terrified, I admitted. Excited. Uncertain but willing to learn. Much like any parent, I imagine. Greg pulled me closer, his arms encircling me in the familiar comfort of his embrace. That's how I felt the first time I held Sam as a baby, he confessed. David asked me to be his godfather, and I was petrified I'd drop him or break him somehow. But then he gripped my finger with his tiny hand, and everything just made sense. You should have told me, I said, though the words held no recrimination now, only a gentle acknowledgement of our shared history. I should have. He agreed. From now on, no more secrets. Everything in the open, even the scary parts. Even the scary parts, I echoed, sealing the promise between us. As sleep began to claim me, I found myself thinking about the strange, circuitous path that had led us to this moment, how a financial discrepancy had unraveled secrets but also unwound the tight control I'd maintained over my emotions for years. How the family I'd convinced myself I didn't need had found its way to me through unexpected channels. The world was messier than my carefully maintained spreadsheets would suggest, more complex than columns of debits and credits. People didn't fit neatly into designated categories or follow predictable patterns of behavior. Even I methodical, practical Caroline had surprised myself with the capacity to adapt and embrace a future far different from what I'd planned. Sometimes, it seemed, the most significant growth came not from following a predetermined path but from navigating the unexpected detours with courage and an open heart. From discovering that the perfect life you'd constructed might not be perfect after all, but that something richer and more authentic might be waiting just beyond the boundaries you'd drawn for yourself. And sometimes, finding a secret family might just be the key to discovering your own. 2 years later, I stood in our expanded kitchen, supervising Sam as he carefully measured ingredients for the welcome home cake. Elise was due to return from her medical volunteer mission in Guatemala that evening, and Sam had insisted on baking her favorite carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. Is this enough cinnamon? He asked, holding up a measuring spoon for my inspection. Perfect, I confirmed. Remember what he taught you about precision in baking? It's like financial planning, he recited, grinning. Measurements matter. At 9.5, Sam's stutter had all but disappeared, emerging only when he was extremely excited or tired. His academic performance had improved steadily under our shared guidance, his natural intelligence flourishing with consistent support and structure. The legal arrangements we'd established joint guardianship with Elise maintaining primary custody, but Greg and I having clearly defined rights and responsibilities had raised a few eyebrows among more traditional acquaintances. But for us, it represented a thoughtful, intentional approach to family building that honored all our needs and strengths. Elise had relocated to a townhouse just 3 blocks from our home, creating a fluid arrangement where Sam moved easily between both households. During her 6-week missions with Doctors Without Borders, he stayed primarily with us, maintaining his school routine and activities without disruption. Greg entered the kitchen, camera in hand as always, capturing the moment of domestic tranquility for his ongoing photo essay, Family Redefined, a project that had unexpectedly attracted attention from several major photography journals. How's the cake coming along? He asked, snapping a shot of Sam's flour-dusted face. Aunt Caroline says my cinnamon measurement is perfect, Sam reported proudly. And I didn't even use the calculator this time. Look at you, doing math in your head like a financial wizard, Greg. Tease it, ruffling the boy's hair. Must be your aunt's influence. I smiled, watching their easy interaction. The bond between them had only deepened over time, but my own relationship with Sam had evolved into something equally significant built on shared interests, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The doorbell rang, cutting through our domestic scene. That's probably the delivery guy. With Mom's flowers, Sam said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. I'll get it. As he raced to the door, Greg moved to stand beside me, slipping an arm around my waist. Happy? He asked softly, echoing the question he'd posed 2 years earlier. I leaned into his embrace, considering all that had changed since that fateful discovery of financial irregularities. My career had shifted. Somewhat. I now specialized in family financial planning with a particular focus on non-traditional family structures. Greg's photography had found new depth and purpose through his documentation of our evolving family. And I had discovered capacities for flexibility and emotional openness I hadn't known I possessed. Yes, I answered honestly. Happier than I thought possible. Me too, he murmured, pressing a kiss to my temple. Though I still get sweaty palms remembering that night you confronted me with the bank statements. As well you should, I teased. Never try to slip. Financial discrepancies past an advisor. Best mistake I ever made, he countered. Without it, we might never have found our way here. Before I could respond, Sam burst back into the kitchen, but instead of carrying a floral delivery, he was leading Elise herself a day early from her trip, her face alight with joy at the surprise she'd orchestrated. Mom! Sam exclaimed. We're making you a cake, but it's not ready yet. The best surprises are never perfectly timed, Elise laughed, hugging her son tightly before embracing both Greg and me in turn. I caught an earlier flight. Couldn't wait another day to see you all. As we gathered around the kitchen island, Sam resuming his baking with renewed enthusiasm, Elisa unpacking small gifts from Guatemala, Greg documenting it all. Through his camera lens I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This wasn't the family I'd imagined for myself 15 years ago when Greg and I exchanged vows. It was messier, more complex, with boundaries that required constant navigation and communication. But it was also richer, more authentic, founded on deliberate choice rather than convention or expectation. Greg caught my eye across the kitchen, his expression soft with understanding. He knew exactly what I was thinking, a product of the deeper connection we'd forged through crisis and recovery. To family, he Said, raising his coffee mug in a small toast. To family, Elise and I echoed, as Sam looked up from his mixing bowl with flour-dusted cheeks and a gap-toothed smile that never failed to warm my heart. Family not defined by blood or legal documents alone, but by the daily choice to show up for each other, to grow together through challenges, to create something beautiful from unexpected beginnings. I thought back to that spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen at 2 Uhr nachts, the discovery that had initiated this journey. What had seemed like financial infidelity had ultimately revealed a different kind of truth, that the most valuable assets in life couldn't be quantified in columns and rows, that the richest portfolios were diversified with love and trust and courage. That sometimes, the most precise financial advisor needed to embrace the beautiful imprecision of human connection. As Sam carefully poured batter into the cake pan, his tongue caught between his teeth. In concentration, I made a mental note to update our family trust documents, small, practical actions that reinforced our commitment to this unconventional but precious family we'd created together. Some habits, after all, never changed even when everything else did, and that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all. Raute, I discovered my husband had a secret family. Part 3, Raute New Challenges. And deeper connections. 5 years had passed since that fateful night when I discovered the financial transfers that changed the course of our lives. Sam was now 12, navigating the complex terrain of middle school with the quiet confidence that came from knowing he was surrounded by adults who championed his success. Our unconventional family had settled into rhythms that felt both structured and fluid. The legal guardianship arrangement we'd established with Elise had evolved into something rare but remarkably functional: a harmonious co-parenting relationship between three adults genuinely committed to one child's well-being. On a crisp October morning, I sat in my home office reviewing Sam's college fund projections. The investments had performed well, and with continued disciplined contributions, we were on track to fully fund his undergraduate education at virtually any institution he might choose. I made a few adjustments to the portfolio, slightly increasing the allocation to growth stocks to take advantage of his still long time horizon. Aunt Caroline? Sam's voice interrupted my calculations. He stood in the doorway, his lanky frame already showing signs of the growth spurt his pediatrician had predicted. "Can I talk to you about something?" "Of course," I said, closing my laptop to give him my full attention, a habit I'd deliberately cultivated over the years. "What's on your mind?" Sam entered the office, fidgeting with the sleeve of his sweatshirt in a way that reminded me of Greg when he was anxious. "It's about school," he said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "Ms. Ramirez thinks I should apply for the advanced mathematics program at Westridge Academy." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. Sam's mathematical aptitude had always been exceptional, something I'd nurtured with the same care Greg had fostered his photographic eye. "It's a prestigious program." "Yeah," he agreed. But his expression remained troubled. "The thing is, it's really expensive. Like, really expensive. And it would mean commuting across town 3 days a week for the specialized classes." Now he understood his hesitation. Despite our efforts to raise him with financial awareness rather than anxiety, Sam remained acutely conscious of costs and impositions, a trait likely stemming from the financial insecurity of his early years. "Have you talked to your mom about this?" I asked gently. "Not yet." He looked down at his hands. "I wanted to ask you first. Since you manage the money stuff." The simple trust inherent in this statement touched me deeply. "Sam, educational opportunities like this are exactly what your college fund is designed for. If this program is right for you academically, we can absolutely make it work financially." Relief washed over his face. "Really? You don't think it's too much?" "Not if it's the right fit for your abilities and interests," I assured him. "Why don't we set up a family meeting tonight? All 4 of us can discuss the logistics." Sam nodded, his enthusiasm visibly building. "Ms. Ramirez says they have a special project on financial algorithms. She thought I'd be perfect for it because of you." "Because of me?" I echoed, surprised. "Yeah. I kind of told her how you taught me about compound interest when I was 7, he admitted with a sheepish grin. "And how we do market analysis for fun on weekends." I laughed, unexpectedly moved by this revelation. "Other kids play video games, and you choose to analyze market trends with your aunt. You really are one of a kind, Sam Mitchell Warren." The hyphenated surname had been Elise's idea, a symbolic acknowledgement of our shared family connection without legally changing Sam's name. He wore it proudly in informal settings, though his school records still listed him officially as Samuel Warren. "So we'll talk about ET tonight," he confirmed, already edging toward the door, energy restored. "Absolutely. I'll text your mom and Uncle Greg right now." As Sam bounded away, I sent a group message to our family Yet another modern adaptation that facilitated our co-parenting arrangement. Within minutes, both had confirmed their availability for dinner at our house that evening. Greg arrived home first, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, his face weathered from a day shooting exteriors for a sustainable architecture magazine. At 50, he'd grown more distinguished with time silver threading through his dark hair, laugh lines deepening around his eyes. Success had found him in recent years, his Family Redefined photo essay ultimately expanding into a book that had resonated deeply with non-traditional families across the country. "Sam's bouncing off the walls about something," he remarked, kissing me hello. All I could get out of him was that there's a family meeting tonight. And it's mathematically significant. I explained about the advanced program at Westridge, watching Greg's expression shift from curiosity to pride. "That's fantastic," he said, setting down his camera equipment. Though I'll never understand where he got his mathematical brain. David could barely balance a checkbook, and Elise is the first to admit that numbers aren't her strong suit. "Nature's little mysteries," I replied with a smile. "Like how neither you nor I have an athletic bone in our bodies, yet Sam made the track team." Speaking of which, Greg checked his watch. "I'm supposed to pick him up from practice in 20 minutes. Want to come along? We could swing by that Italian place on the way back, save everyone from my cooking tonight." Tempting, I laughed, but I have a client call in 10 minutes. The Morrison divorce is getting complicated. Splitting assets with a family business involved always is. Greg's expression softened with understanding. My specialized practice in financial planning for complex family structures had grown significantly in recent years, built partly on our own experience navigating unconventional arrangements. "Take out." "It is, then," he decided. "I'll text Elise to let her know." After they left, I completed my client call, providing guidance on equitable division of business interests while protecting a child's future inheritance. As I hung up, I couldn't help reflecting on how much my professional perspective had evolved since our own family reconfiguration. I approached financial planning now not just as mathematical calculations but as emotional architecture, the structures that supported human connections and aspirations. By the time Elise arrived that evening, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of garlic and basil from the Italian takeout Greg had procured. At 43, she remained striking, her auburn hair now styled in a practical bob, her nurse practitioner scrubs exchanged for casual jeans and a sweater. Her recent promotion to Director of Pediatric Services at Portland Memorial had been a source of celebration for all of us, a well-deserved recognition of her clinical expertise and leadership. "Sorry I'm late," she apologized, setting down her bag. "Emergency consult just as I was leaving." "Everyone's fine," Greg assured her. "Sam's setting the table, and Caroline's opening wine." "Bless you," Elise sat with feeling, accepting the glass I offered. "I've been thinking about this all afternoon. Sam texted me something cryptic about mathematisch. Opportunities requiring family consensus." I laughed. That sounds exactly like him. Our family dinner unfolded with the comfortable familiarity of long practice updates on work projects and school events, gentle teasing and inside jokes, the easy flow of conversation among people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. When Sam finally broached the subject of the Westridge Academy program, he presented it with the methodical thoroughness I taught him: academic benefits, logistical considerations, and yes, financial implications. "I've looked up the tuition online," he said, pulling out a carefully prepared spreadsheet that made my heart swell with pride. "It's $12,500 per year for the supplemental program, plus transportation costs and materials. I've calculated it comes to approximately $14,275 annually when everything is factored in." Elise's eyebrows rose slightly at the figure, though she maintained a neutral expression. That's certainly a significant investment. It is, I agreed, but one that aligns perfectly with our educational priorities for Sam. The college fund is actually ahead of projections, and we've always said that the right preparatory experiences are as important as the eventual university selection. Greg nodded his agreement. The portfolio Caroline's built can absolutely accommodate this without compromising the long-term goals. Sam looked between the three of us, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. So, you all think I should do it? If this is something you're passionate about, Elise Said. Carefully, then yes, I believe we should support your application. But Sam, I want to be sure this is coming from you, not from a desire to please us. It was a perceptive question, highlighting Elise's particular strength as a parent, her intuitive understanding of emotional motivations. Sam had always been eager to make us all proud, sometimes at the expense of his own preferences. I really want this, Sam said after a moment's reflection. Math makes sense to me in a way nothing else does. Except maybe photography, he added with a quick smile at Greg. Then we're all in agreement, Greg concluded. We'll support your application however we can. The relief and joy on Sam's face made any financial consideration secondary. This, I had learnt, was the true heart of family economic planning, not just accumulating resources, but deploying them in service of growth and opportunity. Later that evening, after Sam had retreated to the guest room he still maintained at our house, though he spent most weeknights at Elise's townhouse, the three adults lingered at the kitchen table, sharing a second bottle of wine. Westridge is an exceptional opportunity, Reiter added, addressing the slight concern I'd detected in Elise's reaction. Their graduates typically receive offers from top universities. I know, Elise acknowledged, turning her wine glass slowly. It's not the program I'm questioning. It's just. She hesitated. What is it? Greg prompted gently. Elise sighed. Sometimes I worry that I'm not contributing equally to all this. You two handle most of the financial aspects of Sam's upbringing, the extra opportunities, the investments. My nursing salary is comfortable, but it doesn't compare to what you both bring to the table. That's not how family works, Greg objected immediately. We've never kept score. I know you don't, Elise said with a small smile. But I do, sometimes. I'm his mother. Traditionally, that would mean I'm primarily responsible for his welfare. I considered her concerns thoughtfully. Elise, do you know what Sam told his guidance counselor when she asked about his career aspirations? She shook her head. He said he wants to combine financial analysis with healthcare administration, so he can help hospitals serve more patients while remaining financially stable. I watched her expression as the implication registered. That's your influence. He sees the work you do, the lives you impact. He wants to support that mission with his own talents. Elise's eyes widened. Schlichtly. He said that? He did, I confirmed. Your contribution isn't measured in dollars, Elise. It's in the values you've instilled, the care you've modeled, the stability you've provided. Sam is who he is largely because of you. We're all bringing different strengths to his upbringing, Greg added. That's the beauty of our arrangement. Elise nodded, visibly processing our reassurance. I suppose I'm feeling particularly reflective lately. 12 years a single mother, 5 years in this co-parenting relationship. Sometimes I still can't believe how it all unfolded. From financial discovery to family discovery, I mused, remembering my own journey from betrayal to acceptance to genuine appreciation. Not the path any of us expected. Life rarely follows the expected path, Greg said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Thank goodness for that. As we continued talking into the evening, I reflected on the unique bond we'd formed, three adults. Initially connected through circumstance rather than choice, now intentionally linked through mutual respect and shared purpose. It wasn't always easy, and it certainly wasn't conventional, but it worked for us, and more importantly, it worked for Sam. The Westridge Academy acceptance letter arrived in December, just before the winter holidays. Sam's application had impressed the admissions committee, particularly his essay on the mathematical patterns underlying family financial systems, a topic he'd explored with my guidance during our weekend finance fund sessions. January 15th, he announced, reading from the letter with barely contained excitement. "That's when the program starts. That gives us just enough time to arrange the logistics," I noted, already mentally calculating transportation schedules and academic calendar integrations. "We should celebrate," Greg declared. "This calls for something special." We settled on a weekend trip to the coast, a family tradition we'd established for marking significant milestones. The four of us rented a beachfront cottage, spending days exploring tide pools and evenings playing increasingly competitive rounds of board games. On the final night, as Greg and Sam combed the beach for photographic opportunities in the sunset light, Elise and I sat on the deck watching them from a distance. "He's thriving," Elise said softly. "5 years ago, I worried constantly about giving him enough stability, enough opportunity, enough male influence after losing David. Now look at him." He nodded, watching Sam gesture animatedly to Greg about a composition angle, their silhouettes outlined against the orange sky. "He has something many children don't, regardless of their family. Strukture." "What's that?" "Adults who communicate," I said simply. "Who put his needs above their egos. Who model problem-solving and adaptability." Elise laughed quietly. "When you put it that way, our unconventional setup almost sounds ideal." "Maybe it is, for us," I suggested. "Not perfect, certainly. But deliberately crafted to leverage our collective strengths." We fell into companionable silence, watching the waves roll in as twilight descended. After a moment, Elise spoke again, her tone more hesitant. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you and Greg. Something that might change our dynamics." I turned to her, curious. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone. For about 4 months now. It's becoming serious." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. Elise had dedicated herself so completely to Sam and her career that her personal life had often seemed an afterthought. "Anyone we know?" "His name is Marcus. He's a pediatric surgeon at the hospital. Divorced, 2 teenage daughters who live primarily with their mother in Seattle." She twisted her hands slightly in her lap. "He knows about our arrangement with Sam. He's been remarkably understanding, actually. But I'm not sure how to integrate him into this family structure we've created." I considered this thoughtfully. A new significant other would indeed alter the delicate balance we'd established, not necessarily negatively, but change always required adjustment. "Have you talked to Sam about this?" I asked. "In general terms. He knows I'm dating Marcus and seems comfortable with the concept. But he hasn't had to consider what it might mean for our family system yet." I nodded, understanding her caution. "Let's talk with Greg tonight after Sam's asleep. We'll figure out a transition plan together, the same way we've handled every other evolution in our arrangement." Relief crossed Elise's features. "Thank you for being so supportive. I was worried you and Greg might feel, I don't know, that I was disrupting what works." "Elise," I said with gentle firmness, "you deserve happiness in all aspects of your life. We'll adapt, the same way we've adapted to everything else." Besides, I added with a smile, Sam could probably benefit from having another positive male figure in his orbit as he navigates adolescence. Later that night, after sharing Elise's news with Greg, who responded with characteristic warmth and encouragement, we outlined a gradual integration plan. Casual group activities first, followed by more structured inclusion in family discussions, with careful attention to Sam's comfort level throughout. We should meet him before Sam does, Greg suggested. Practically. Get to know him a bit, make sure we're all on the same page about our priorities for Sam. That makes sense, Elise agreed, visibly relieved by our constructive approach. Markus has actually been asking to meet you both. He says you sound like remarkably evolved humans. I laughed at the description. Evolved through necessity, perhaps. 5 years ago, I'm not sure any of us would have predicted we'd be having this conversation. 5 years ago, I never would have imagined having the courage to pursue a relationship again, Elise admitted. But seeing how we've all created this functional family, it made me realize that love and connection can take many forms. As we continued planning, I reflected on how far we'd all come since that night I discovered the mysterious bank transfers. From a moment that could have shattered lives to a foundation for building something uniquely resilient. We had transformed potential devastation into deliberate creation, a family structure custom designed to support each member's growth and well-being. The integration of Markus into our family ecosystem proceeded with the thoughtful intentionality that had become our hallmark. Greg and I met him first, over dinner at a neutral restaurant, engaging in the delicate dance of assessment and impression management that such situations demanded. Markus proved to be exactly as Elise had described: intelligent, calm, with the measured confidence typical of successful surgeons tempered by a genuine warmth in his interactions. He asked perceptive questions about our guardianship arrangement, listened attentively to our explanations, and most importantly, showed authentic interest in Sam's well-being and development. This is unconventional. Certainly, he acknowledged at one point, but having gone through my own divorce and the complex family restructuring that followed, I've become a firm believer that conventional isn't necessarily optimal. What matters is that the child's needs are prioritized and the adults communicate effectively. I exchanged a glance with Greg, noting his subtle nod of approval. That's been our philosophy exactly, I confirmed. Sometimes the best family structures are the ones deliberately designed rather than inherited by default. The evening concluded with tentative plans for a casual group outing, a science museum exhibition that would interest Sam while providing a low-pressure environment for initial interactions with Markus. Well, Elise texted later that night. Verdict? We like him, I replied honestly. Tautvoll, articulate, and clearly smitten with you. Most importantly, he seems to understand and respect our family dynamics. The museum outing proved successful, with Sam responding positively to Markus's expertise in human anatomy and genuine interest in Sam's mathematical perspective on the scientific exhibits. Over the following months, Markus gradually became a familiar presence at family gatherings and educational events, his medical knowledge providing valuable insights as we navigated Sam's increasingly advanced academic pursuits. By summer, when Elise tentatively broached the subject of Markus moving into her townhouse, Sam's response was characteristically pragmatic. That makes financial sense, he declared. During a family discussion, consolidated housing costs and utility expenses would create approximately 22% monthly savings, which could be redirected to educational investments or experiences. Greg choked slightly on his drink, while Elise and I exchanged amused glances. Those are certainly factors to consider, Elise managed, clearly fighting laughter. But I was more concerned about how you feel about sharing your space and time with Markus on a daily basis. Sam considered this with the serious deliberation he applied to all significant decisions. I think it would be acceptable, he concluded. Marcus explains surgical procedures in detail when I ask, unlike my other friends' parents who get squeamish. And he said he'd help me build the computer system I want for my financial modeling projects. High praise indeed, Greg murmured, grinning at the boy's unique criteria for approval. The transition proved relatively smooth, though not without occasional tension as everyone adjusted to the new family configuration. Marcus's teenage daughters visited during school breaks, adding another layer of complexity to our already multifaceted family Struktur. Lucy and Ava, 16 and 14 respectively, initially regarded our arrangement with suspicious fascination, clearly attempting to reconcile our comfortable interactions with their own more contentious blended family experiences. So you're all just friends? Lucy had asked during their first visit, her expression skeptical as she observed Greg, Elisa, Marcus, and me collaborating on dinner preparation with practiced ease. We're family, Sam corrected before any of the adults could respond. Just not the regular kind. It's statistically unusual but functionally superior. The girls had exchanged bemused glances, but over subsequent visits, they gradually relaxed into the unusual dynamic, even participating in what Sam had dubbed our quarterly family strategic planning sessions, the structured discussions we held to address educational decisions, financial planning, and logistical coordination. By the time Sam's 13th birthday arrived in October, our expanded family unit had established new rhythms and traditions. The celebration we organized reflected the unique composition of his support system, a photography exhibition of his work curated by Greg, a mathematical treasure hunt designed by Marcus and me, and a cake decorated with anatomically correct medical imagery courtesy of Elise and her hospital connections. This is the weirdest birthday party I've ever seen, Lucy commented to her sister as Sam enthusiastically explained the golden ratio principles behind his photographic compositions to a small group of equally math-inclined friends. Yeah, Ava agreed, watching the adults coordinate seamlessly around the space. But also kind of cool? Everyone actually seems to like each other. I overheard this exchange as I passed with a tray of refreshments, smiling at their perceptive assessment. We had indeed achieved something unusual, a genuinely collaborative co-parenting relationship expanded to include new connections without sacrificing the foundation we'd built. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Sam had retreated to organize his gifts with characteristic methodical care, the four adults gathered on the patio of our home, sharing wine and reflections under the string lights Greg had installed years earlier. Tierten, Elisa marvelet, shaking her head slightly. I can hardly believe it. Middle school graduation next spring, Greg added. High school on the horizon. Where did our little mathematician go? He's still here, Marcus observed with the insight of a newcomer. Just evolving at an impressive rate. That financial algorithm he's developing for his Westridge project is genuinely innovative. One of my research colleagues at the university was quite taken with his approach. I nodded, pride mixing with a touch of melancholy. He's thriving academically. The Westridge program was absolutely the right choice. Thanks to all of you, Elisa said softly. I could never have provided these opportunities on my own. That's the point of our arrangement, Greg reminded her. None of us has to do it all. We each contribute what we can. Marcus, still relatively new to our established dynamic, looked thoughtful. I've worked with many families through my pediatric practice, he said, and I've rarely seen children with the kind of confidence and security Sam displays. Whatever unconventional paths led to this point, the outcome speaks for itself. His validation, coming from a professional perspective outside our intimate circle, carried particular weight. We had created something that worked not just adequately, but exceptionally well. To Sam, Greg proposed, raising his glass. And to all of us for figuring this out as we go. To family by design, I added, completing the toast. As we clinked glasses in the cool autumn evening, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. 5 years earlier, I had discovered financial transfers that I feared signaled the end of my marriage. Instead, they had ultimately led to an expansion of our definition of family from the narrow confines of a conventional marriage to this rich, complex network of relationships built on trust, communication, and shared purpose. The spreadsheets I once pored over in suspicion had transformed into tools for creating educational opportunities. The betrayal I'd felt had evolved into profound gratitude for the connections we'd formed. The rigid boundaries I'd maintained had softened into permeable membranes that allowed for growth and adaptation. Life's most significant gifts, I'd learned, often came disguised as its greatest challenges. Sometimes you had to loose your grip on what you thought you wanted to open your hands to something you never knew you needed. And sometimes, discovering your husband had a secret family turned out to be just the beginning of a far more interesting story. 2 months after Sam's 13th birthday, as winter settled over Portland with characteristic damp chill, I received an unexpected phone call from my brother, the first communication we'd had in nearly 7 years, since our parents' funeral. The strained relationship had never fully recovered from the financial rift created by his failed restaurant venture, and subsequent attempts at reconciliation had faltered on rocky shores of lingering resentment. Caroline, he began without preamble when I answered. It's Michael. I know, I replied, surprise, making my tone sharper than intended. What's wrong? A bitter laugh came through the line. Still assuming the worst. Some things never change. I bit back a defensive retort, conscious of how easily we could fall into old patterns. I'm sorry. It's just unexpected to hear from you after so long. A heavy sigh. Look, I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Ali's sick. Cancer. It's not good, Caroline. Ali, my sister-in-law of 15 years, mother to my niece and nephew whom I barely knew. The information landed with the dull impact of tragedy concerning people who had once been close but had become nearly strangers. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it despite the distance between us. What can I do? That's why I'm calling. Michael's voice held the strained control of someone barely holding himself together. We're drowning in medical bills. The insurance is fighting us on experimental treatments. I wouldn't ask, but the kids. How much do you need? I asked directly, my financial advisor instincts cutting through to the practical heart of the matter. 50,000, he answered after a pause. I know it's a lot, I'll transfer it. Today, I interrupted. Send me the account details. And Michael. I want to help with more than just money. We should talk about longer-term financial planning, insurance appeals, potential assistance programs. Silence stretched between us, laden with shared history and painful divisions. Why would you do this? He finally asked. After everything? The question gave me pause, forcing me to examine my own motivations. 5 years ago, I might have hesitated, bound by old grievances and the rigid financial principles that had once governed my life. But I was no longer that person. Because family is family, I said simply, echoing the words I'd spoken to Greg years earlier under very different circumstances. However complicated our history, you're still my brother. That evening, I shared the conversation with Greg as we prepared dinner together, a ritual we'd maintained through all the evolutions of our family structure. 50,000 is significant, he observed, not questioning the decision but acknowledging its weight. Though well within our capacity. It is, I agreed, methodically chopping vegetables. And there will likely be more needed down the line, depending on Ally's prognosis and treatment options. Greg studied me with the perceptive gaze that had captured so many nuanced emotions through his camera lens over the years. This is about more than the money, isn't it? I set down the knife, meeting his eyes. I keep thinking about Sam. About how our unconventional family arrangement has given him stability and opportunities he might not have had otherwise. About how the painful discovery that started it all ultimately led to something valuable. And you're wondering if this crisis with Michael might offer a similar opportunity for reconciliation, Greg surmised, understanding as always. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or at least a chance to break the cycle of estrangement. Emily and Jason are 16 and 14. Now Sam's cousins who he's never really known. Family he should have had in his life all along. Greg nodded thoughtfully. Family by birth and family by choice don't have to be mutually exclusive. Exactly, I said, relieved by his immediate understanding. I've been so focused on building our chosen family unit that I've neglected the possibility of healing the biological connections that were damaged. What are you thinking? Greg asked, recognizing the purposeful expression that indicated I was formulating a plan. I want to invite them for Christmas, I said decisively. All of them, Michael, Ally if she's well enough to travel, the kids. Let them see what we've created here. Show them that family can be reconstructed after fracture. Greg smiled, reaching for my hand. I think that's a beautiful idea. And very much in keeping with our philosophy of deliberate family building. The invitation, extended that night in a careful phone call, was met with initial surprise and wariness from Michael. But as I outlined the practical benefits, a change of scenery during a difficult time, the opportunity for their children to connect with a cousin, access to my network of medical and financial professionals who might assist with Ally's situation, his resistance gradually softened. We'll consider it, he said finally. I'll talk to Ally and the kids. That's all he ask, I replied, conscious of not pushing too hard too quickly. And Michael? Whether you come or not, the financial help stands. No strings attached. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as we prepared for both Christmas and the potential expansion of our holiday gathering. I approached the planning with the same methodical thoroughness I applied to financial strategies. Creating contingency arrangements for Ally's medical needs and researching activities that might appeal to teenagers meeting family members for the first time. You're overthinking this, Elise. Observed good-naturedly when I shared my extensive preparations during one of our regular coffee meetings. Though I suppose that's on brand for you. I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. I want it to work, I admitted. After seeing how our unconventional arrangement has benefited Sam, I can't help thinking about what Emily and Jason might have missed without family connection. Speaking of family connections, Elise said, her expression turning more serious, Marcus and I have been talking about making our relationship more permanent. Marriage? I clarified, genuinely pleased by the development. The past year had demonstrated clearly that Marcus was a positive addition to our extended family system. Elise nodded, a mixture of happiness and uncertainty in her expression. It feels right, but I'm conscious of how it might change the dynamics we've established. Legally, financially, emotionally. Change doesn't have to mean disruption. I pointed out. We'll adapt the same way we've adapted to everything else, with clear communication and focus on what's best for Sam. And a lot of spreadsheets, Elise added with a knowing smile. Well, obviously, I agreed, matching her lighthearted tone. I wouldn't be me without comprehensive financial projections for every major life decision. as December progressed, preparations intensified on multiple fronts. Michael confirmed that they would indeed join us for the holidays, with Ally's oncologist approving the trip provided certain precautions were taken. Meanwhile, informal family discussions about Elise and Marcus's engagement led to practical planning sessions about adjustment of our legal arrangements to incorporate his formal role in Sam's life. Sam himself approached both developments with characteristic analytical interest, researching family reconciliation psychology for insights into the upcoming reunion with his estranged relatives and creating a detailed comparison chart of various legal family structures to understand how his mother's potential marriage might affect our guardianship arrangement. He's using data analysis to process emotional changes, Greg observed with a mixture of amusement and pride as we reviewed Sam's latest spreadsheet together. Pure Caroline influence right there. With your artistic presentation, I countered, noting the carefully designed graphics Sam had incorporated. He combines our strengths in the most remarkable ways. 2 days before Christmas, Michael's family arrived. Their expressions a mixture of wariness and exhaustion as they entered our home. Ally moved slowly, the effects of aggressive treatment evident in her thin frame and careful movements, but her eyes remained sharp and observant as she took in the holiday decorations and family photographs that adorned our walls. You have a beautiful home, she offered, the simple courtesy clearly requiring effort in her weakened state. Thank you, I replied, helping her to the most comfortable seat in the living room. We're so glad you could come. Can I get you anything? Water, tea? Michael hovered protectively near his wife, while their children Emily and Jason stood awkwardly to the side, clearly uncertain of their place in this unfamiliar environment. The tension in the room was palpable. Until Sam entered, carrying a stack of carefully wrapped gifts. Are you my cousins? He asked directly, addressing Emily and Jason without preamble. I've prepared welcome packages based on statistical interest patterns for your demographic groups, but I can adjust if my predictions were inaccurate. The startled expressions on the teenagers' faces gave way to tentative smiles at Sam's unusual approach. Jason, the younger of the two, stepped forward first. What kind of statistics? He asked, curiosity overcoming shyness. Sam's face lit up at the question. Primarily preference distribution analyses from consumer behavior studies, cross-referenced with educational trend data for college-bound students. Would you like to see my methodology? Maybe later, Emily interjected, her tone gently amused. How about you just show us what you got us first? The ice effectively broken, Sam led his cousins to the kitchen to examine his carefully curated welcome gifts, leaving the adults to navigate their own reacquaintance. Michael remained stiff, his posture defensive, but Ally reached out to take my hand. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for the money, but for opening your home to us. Michael wouldn't say it, but this means more than you know. I squeezed her hand gently, struck by the grace she displayed despite her illness. Family should be together, especially during difficult times. I'm sorry it took so long for us to remember that. The initial awkwardness gradually dissipated as the day progressed, particularly when Elise, Marcus, and Marcus's daughters arrived for dinner, creating a larger gathering that diluted the intensity of the sibling reunion. The expanded family dynamics with its various connections and relationships provided natural conversation topics that steered away from old wounds. After dinner, as the younger generation engaged in a board game of Sam's design, involving both mathematical strategy and financial simulations, naturally, Michael and I found ourselves momentarily alone in the kitchen. Your son is something else, he commented, gesturing toward Sam, who was enthusiastically explaining a complex game rule to his cousins.